When a millionaire offered a taxi driver a handful of cash for helping him, everyone thought he'd grab it instantly, but his answer left the entire crowd speechless. Rain was falling hard over New York City, washing the streets in reflections of neon lights and tail lamps. A yellow taxi sat idling near the Grand Central Hotel, its windshield streaked with raindrops. Inside sat Ethan Cole, a middle-aged cab driver with kind, tired eyes and a calm face. He'd been driving since dawn, chasing just enough fares to pay rent and maybe buy his daughter a birthday cake. Across the street, a long black limousine rolled to a stop. The hotel doorman rushed out, umbrella in hand. The back door opened, and out stepped Richard Lawson, a billionaire investor, tall, confident, and wrapped in a tailored gray suit that screamed money. Cameras flashed. Paparazzi shouted his name. His assistant followed with an iPad and coffee in hand. But seconds later, the unthinkable happened. The limousine's engine coughed, sputtered, and died right in the middle of the wet road. The driver tried restarting it. Nothing. Traffic started honking. People started staring. Richard's voice rose, sharp and frustrated. "Are you serious right now? This car cost more than some people's houses." Ethan, still in his cab, watched the scene through the rain. He hesitated for a second, then stepped out, rain soaking through his worn jacket. "Hey, I'm a mechanic by trade," he called out politely. "If you want, I can take a look." Richard turned his head, brows raised, almost amused. "You? A taxi driver? This is a Maybach, not a rental car." The crowd laughed quietly. A few people even recorded on their phones, waiting for a scene. But Ethan didn't react. He just smiled faintly. "Engines don't care about money, sir. They only care about hands that know what they're doing." Something in his calmness made Richard pause. After a beat, he shrugged. "Fine, 10 minutes. If you can make it run, I'll give you $1,000. Ethan didn't say a word. He just nodded and popped the hood. Rain dripped from his hair as he worked, his fingers moving with quiet precision. For the onlookers, it looked almost poetic. A worn-out cab driver fixing the pride of a millionaire in the middle of Manhattan. 5 minutes later, a low growl filled the air. The Maybach's engine roared back to life. People around clapped softly. The chauffeur looked relieved. Richard stared, half in disbelief, half in pride. He pulled out a wad of $100 bills and extended it toward Ethan. "Here, you earned every bit of this, my friend." Ethan looked at the money, then at Richard. His face didn't change. "No, thank you," he said simply. Richard blinked. "Excuse me, you're refusing $1,000? Ethan nodded once. "I didn't help you for money, sir. Someone once helped me when I was stranded with my little girl years ago. I'm just passing that forward." The laughter around them stopped. Even the rain seemed quieter. For the first time, Richard didn't have a witty comeback. There was something about that man, his voice, his calmness, that cut deeper than money ever could. Ethan just gave a small smile, got back into his taxi, and drove away into the rain. But Richard couldn't move. He stood there, wallet still open, money still in hand, staring after that cab. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't their last meeting. Because by tomorrow morning, he'd discover who that taxi driver truly was, and his entire world would shift. The next morning, Richard Lawson sat in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, but for once, the city lights didn't impress him. His assistant spoke about meetings and investors, but his mind was still stuck on that taxi driver. The man's calm refusal replayed over and over. "Some debts are repaid by kindness, not cash." Those words hit him harder than any business loss he'd ever taken. Richard had built his empire on control. He bought companies, people, and loyalty. But he couldn't buy the peace he saw in that man's eyes. He leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Who says no to $1,000? Later that afternoon, while on his way to a charity gala, Richard noticed something familiar at a gas station across the street. That same yellow taxi. Without thinking, he told his driver to stop. He stepped out into the drizzle and walked over. Sure enough, behind the wheel sat the same man, Ethan Cole. Ethan looked surprised but smiled politely. "Morning, sir. Engine behaving well?" Richard chuckled lightly. "Better than yesterday." "You were right. I just needed to stop revving too hard." They both shared a small laugh. For the first time, Richard looked at him not as a cab driver, but as a person. "Let me buy you a cup of coffee," Richard said suddenly. "No tricks, no money, just a conversation." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They crossed the street to a small diner, the kind where the coffee's too strong and the napkins are too thin. As they sat, Richard studied the man's face. There was something dignified behind his humble appearance, something grounded. "You've been driving long?" Richard asked. 12 years, Ethan replied. "Before that, I worked in auto repair, until the shop closed." "Family?" "Just my daughter. She's 16 now. Wants to study engineering, believe it or not." Richard smiled faintly. "Sounds like a good kid." Ethan's eyes softened. "She is. I promised her she'll never have to feel what it's like to go to bed hungry. Like we used to." Richard went silent for a moment. There was something raw, real, and unpolished about this man's honesty. It reminded him of something. Or rather, someone. A few minutes later, a tall man entered the diner and froze at the sight of them. He was the hotel manager from last night. "Mr. Lawson," he exclaimed, "I didn't expect to see you here." His eyes darted to Ethan and he frowned. Oh, him. He was loitering around the hotel last night after the commotion. Richard's tone hardened immediately. He wasn't loitering. He was helping. The manager stammered. I didn't mean—" "No need to explain," Richard interrupted calmly. "Sometimes the people we ignore know more than we think." Ethan smiled quietly but didn't say a word. Later, as they stepped outside, Richard extended his hand. "You're an interesting man, Ethan. I owe you a lot more than an engine repair." Ethan shook his hand. "No, sir. You don't owe me anything." Richard looked him in the eyes. "Well, I'd like to change that. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Maybe there's something I can offer. Something that's not cash." Ethan hesitated. "Sir, I appreciate it, but I'm fine where I am." Richard smiled knowingly. "You fixed my car when everyone was laughing." "Humor me, just once." Ethan finally nodded. "All right, one visit. That's it." The next day, Richard's assistant looked puzzled. When he saw a cab pull up in front of the building, Ethan stepped out, wearing a freshly ironed shirt and his usual calm smile. When he entered the penthouse office, every executive in the room paused. Richard stood up. "Gentlemen, this is the man who saved my engine, and maybe my patience." The room chuckled lightly, but what happened next made everyone go silent. Richard turned to Ethan and said, "Before I make you an offer, there's something I need to know. Who exactly are you?" Ethan's smile faded slightly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. Old, slightly worn, but still clear. He handed it to Richard. On it were the words, "Cole Automotive Solutions, founder, Ethan Cole." Richard's eyes widened. That was a name he knew. It was a small auto company he had once tried to acquire years ago. The same one that had mysteriously shut down before the deal went through. And now, the man who refused his money was the founder of it. Richard looked up slowly, speechless. Ethan simply smiled and said, "You wanted to know why I don't chase money, Mr. Lawson? It's because I've already lost everything once trying to do that. Now I just fix things, not for profit, but for peace." The room went silent, but the real twist was still to come. Because Ethan's past, and the reason his company failed, was something that would soon flip Richard's world upside down. For a long moment, Richard Lawson stared at that old business card in silence. The name Cole Automotive Solutions felt like a ghost from his past, one he had hoped never to see again. Memories flickered. 5 years ago, During one of his aggressive expansion phases, Richard's company had absorbed several small businesses, some willingly, some not. One of those was a small, family-run workshop in Queens. He hadn't even remembered the owner's name back then, but now he did. Ethan Cole. His stomach twisted slightly as the realization hit. Richard swallowed hard. Cole Automotive. You ran that place? Ethan nodded quietly. Yes, until one of your acquisitions forced us out. The buyout clause killed our supply contracts overnight. We couldn't recover. The room fell completely silent. Every executive froze, glancing at Richard. Ethan continued, calm but firm. I don't blame you, Mr. Lawson. You did what businessmen do. You grew. I was just a name on a document, collateral damage in someone else's success. Richard's throat went dry. The guilt, the kind he had buried under profits and meetings, rose to the surface. Ethan, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know it was you. Ethan gave a faint, forgiving smile. I know. That's why I didn't take your money yesterday. I didn't want your pity or your debt. I just wanted you to see me. The words hit like thunder. Not angry, not accusing, just true. For the first time in years, Richard Lawson, the man who never lost a negotiation, couldn't find the right words. He looked down, then said softly, You fixed my car, and I broke your life. That's not balance. Ethan shook his head. It's not about balance. It's about learning. Sometimes life takes everything from you, just to teach you what actually matters. A moment passed, heavy, human, and real. Then Richard stood up, straightened his jacket, and turned to his assistant. Cancel my 2 p.m. meeting. The assistant froze. Sir? You heard me, Richard said. I've got something more important to fix. He looked back at Ethan. Come with me. Ethan frowned, unsure, but he followed. They drove across the city to an old, boarded-up auto shop, the one that used to carry Ethan's name. Its faded sign still read, Cole Automotive Solutions. Rainwater leaked through the roof, vines creeping up the walls. Richard stood silently for a moment, then handed Ethan a key. You said engines need understanding, not money, Richard began. But sometimes people need both. So, I'm giving this back to you, along with the resources to rebuild it properly. Ethan stared at the key, speechless. Mr. Lawson, I can't accept that. You're not accepting a gift, Richard said. You're accepting justice, something I should have given years ago. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he took the key. For a man who'd lost everything, it wasn't about the money. It was about being seen again. A few weeks later, the sign was replaced. Fresh paint covered the walls. And outside the newly restored Cole Automotive Solutions, a sleek Maybach sat gleaming under the sun, the same car that had broken down that rainy night. Richard stood by it. No cameras, no suits, no reporters. Just 2 men who had found peace through the very thing that had once broken them. You know, Richard said with a faint smile, you never cashed that $1,000 I offered. Ethan laughed softly. Some payments mean more when they're not made. They shook hands, not as a billionaire and a cab driver, but as 2 people who finally understood that wealth isn't counted in money, but in moments that change who you are. Weeks later, a small story ran in a local newspaper. Former billionaire fund's reopening of small auto repair shop says he's investing in people, not companies. Richard kept the newspaper clipping in his office drawer, right next to an old business card, the one that reminded him of the man who fixed more than his car. He fixed his soul.